Welcome to the fourth module of the ICWA Education Series presented by the Nebraska Court Improvement Project in collaboration with the Nebraska Indian Child Welfare Coalition. Today we will discuss the types of proceedings in which the ICWA applies, which include child custody proceedings, emergency removals, and certain voluntary proceedings. Finally, we'll end this module with a few learning check questions. Under both state and federal statutes, ICWA applies to child custody proceedings that involve an Indian child. Let's dig a little deeper into what constitutes a child custody proceeding for the purposes of ICWA. A child custody proceeding includes a foster care placement, termination of parental rights, pre-adoptive placement, adoptive placement, and status offense proceedings. It's important to note that the ICWA does not apply to tribal court proceedings, divorce proceedings, or custody disputes between two parents or juvenile delinquency proceedings, often referred to as law violations. A foster care placement is any action that removes an Indian child from his or her parent or custodian for placement in a foster home or institution. With a foster care placement, the parent or Indian custodian cannot have the child returned upon demand, but parental rights have not been terminated. While most foster care placements involve the physical removal of a child, a proceeding in which the juvenile court physically places an Indian child with his or her parent but awards legal custody to DHHS is also considered a foster care placement. In a 2014 Nebraska Supreme Court case, in re interest of Shayla H., the court found that any involuntary proceeding that could result in a foster care placement is one that is seeking to effect a foster care placement. It is also worth noting that private guardianship proceedings qualify as a foster care placement for purposes of the ICWA and the NICWA. Again, our Nebraska Supreme Court provides guidance. In a 2020 Nebraska Supreme Court case, in re guardianship of Eliza W., the court ruled that the procedures, protections, and requirements of the ICWA applied in a case in which a maternal grandmother sought to establish a guardianship for an Indian child over the objection of her daughter, the child's mother. Thus, the court held that the provisions of ICWA applied to private child guardianship disputes and not just removals by the state.
Remember me, down the road, hand in hand, you and me.
Termination of parental rights refers to any action resulting in the complete and final severance of the parent-child relationship. Pre-adoptive placement is the temporary placement of an Indian child in a foster home or institution after the termination of parental rights, but prior to or in lieu of adoptive placement. The term adoptive placement refers to the permanent placement of an Indian child for adoption, including any action resulting in a final decree of adoption. Status offense proceedings are juvenile delinquency proceedings that involve an offense that would not be a crime if committed by an adult. Truancy, for example.
That they say that any offense that would be a crime in adult court is not covered by ICWA. Well, the status offense, which is an offense only because someone's status as a juvenile makes truancy unlawful. I could be as truant as I want because I'm not a juvenile, but those status offenses are not law violations, so ICWA absolutely applies to those cases, and I have helped parents file an application for court-appointed counsel, and sometimes the courts puzzle over that a little bit, but they're absolutely entitled to have ICWA apply and get court-appointed counsel in a truancy case or some other type of 3B case.
Both the ICWA and the NICWA authorize a state court to remove an Indian child from his or her parent or Indian custodian for placement in foster home or institution in order to prevent imminent physical damage or harm to the child. However, the emergency removal should end immediately if the placement is no longer necessary to prevent imminent physical danger or harm. The temporary emergency placement may only last up to 30 days. When the emergency removal has ended, the court must either 1. Return the child to the parents or Indian custodian. 2. Transfer the child to the jurisdiction of the appropriate tribe if the child is a ward of the tribal court or a resident domiciled on the reservation. Or 3. Initiate child custody proceedings subject to the provisions of the ICWA. As mentioned previously, voluntary foster care is now one of the applicable proceedings covered by ICWA. A voluntary foster care placement is a non-court involved proceeding in which the department or the state is facilitating a voluntary foster care placement or in-home services to families at risk of entering the foster care system, such as in an alternative response case. An item to note is that the full protection of ICWA does not apply to a voluntary foster care proceeding. The only protections that apply are active efforts, notice which must be given within 5 days of services starting, tribal intervention or participation in the provisions of the services, placement preferences, certain procedural requirements or relinquishments, and termination of parental rights. In a voluntary proceeding, a parent or Indian custodian may withdraw consent to a voluntary foster care placement at any time, and, upon such withdrawal, the child shall be returned to the parent or Indian custodian. If the child is not returned upon the Indian custodian or parent's request, the voluntary proceeding then becomes an involuntary matter, triggering the full protections of the ICWA. We hope this module has been helpful in understanding child custody, emergency, and voluntary proceedings as they apply to the ICWA. Next, we have some learning check questions specific to Module 4. We'll see you soon in Module 5.
Remember me, when the sun comes up in the morning sky, there I will be, soaring with the eagle so high, feeling free. Remember me, down the road, hand in hand, you and me. Hey-oh, hey-oh, hey-oh. Hey-oh, hey-oh. Hey-oh, hey-oh. Hey-oh, hey-oh. Hey-oh, hey-oh. Hey-oh, remember me, when the sun comes up in the morning sky, there I will be, soaring with the eagle so high, feeling free. Remember me, down the road, hand in hand, you and me.